Hey everyone, and welcome back to another breaking news update. My name is Jimmy Boyd, and you were watching Boyd News. Want to thank you so much for tuning in today. I've got a breaking news report coming out for the U.S., and today I have information directly from the U.S. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent that the U.S. is prepared to impose 500% tariffs onto China over its purchases of Russian oil, and he threatened during a speech today to impose these measures if EU partners do the same. Let's go over this new story here on your screen. U.S. threatens China with 500% tariffs over Russian oil purchases. Scott Bessent announced on Wednesday that 85 U.S. senators are willing to grant President Donald Trump the authority to impose tariffs of up to 500% on China for purchases of Russian oil. So this ties into a story we heard back in, I believe, somewhere around March of this year. It was back towards like the first quarter. U.S. Senator Lindsey Graham out of South Carolina in the United States proposed a bill that, if it gets passed in Congress, would force 500% secondary tariffs onto any nations purchasing oil from Russia. This includes China, but we're going to talk about China only today. There's several other nations that could be targeted also, like India and Brazil. But strictly, we'll talk about China because this is what Scott Bessent is warning about today. I'm going to show you guys an article that talks about this because it looks like the 500% tariffs are back on the table, but apparently this has to do with the EU. If the EU decides to slam China with sanctions or tariffs as well, that's when the US will come in with their measures also. So we'll be talking about this starting off the video. We'll go over an article that discusses this story. Also, we have a video of US Secretary of War Pete Hegseth warning Russia to end the war against Ukraine, or the US will take steps necessary to force an end to the war. We'll show you guys that here in just a moment. And also, we have an update regarding Tomahawk missiles to Ukraine, along with a possible emergency situation that unfolded as Pete Hegseth was leaving on his flight out of Belgium after the Ramstein defense meeting with NATO leaders today. So, scary situation there. I'll show you guys some information on that as well. Let's go ahead and jump into the news. We're going to hop on over to a mainstream news report. We'll be here on mint.com. And it says 500% tariffs on China soon. Bessent says 85 U.S. senators ready to give Trump authority over Beijing's Russian oil imports. This coming out today, October 15th, 2025. You can see the dates here. The information reads, U.S. Treasury Secretary Bessent announced on Wednesday, October 15th, that 85 U.S. senators are willing to grant President Donald Trump, the authority to impose tariffs of up to 500% on China for purchases of Russian oil. Bessent said 85 U.S. senators are willing to give President Trump the authority to put up to 500% tariffs on China for the purchase of Russian oil. The proposed tariffs, if implemented, would represent an unprecedented escalation in U.S.-China trade relations, with potential implications for global oil markets and international trade. And such extreme measures could trigger retaliatory tariffs from Beijing and disrupt already fragile supply chains. The United States is prepared to impose tariffs on China for its purchases of Russian oil, but Bessent stressed that Washington's European allies must participate in such action. So again, as we can see here, the U.S. is willing to impose up to 500% tariffs onto China, but they want European allies to act first. They want them to hit China with these sanctions first. Then the U.S. will come in with theirs up to 500% tariffs onto China. Finally, it says here it is the purchase of Russian oil by China that fuels the Russian war machines. China buys 60% of Russian energy. They buy 90% of Iranian energy, Bessent said during a press conference on Wednesday. Bessent added that the U.S. would produce photographs supplied by Ukraine showing Chinese components in Russian drones operating in Ukraine. So yeah, we'll have to see if the U.S. moves forward with this, but obviously we got to see Europe make some action here first onto China. Now, could this stop China from purchasing Russian oil directly? Maybe it really could. I mean, that's pretty high percentage of tariffs on top of what's been announced recently, somewhere around 100 to 130 could be announced onto China here very soon. This talks about a pause on U.S. tariffs for rare earths talks. There's another trade war that's going on between China and the United States right now because China recently announced some export controls with rare earth minerals that go to all different nations around the world. That's when Trump came out just a couple days ago, announced 100% tariffs onto China, but apparently that's on hold right now. They're talking about on how they're going to resolve this issue between each other's nation. That's when, if you guys saw late last week, I think it was Friday or Saturday, the markets were crashing in the United States. Even cryptos were going down as well. There's some information on the trade war that's going on right now between China and also the US, but we're not going to talk about that here in this video. I'll link it down below for you guys in the description if you want to read more on that article. But now we're going to jump on over to talk about Pete Hegseth. We're going to hop on over here to X with open source intel. Secretary of War Pete Hegseth on Russia's war in Ukraine says, quote, "If this war does not end, if there is no path to peace in the short term, then the United States, along with our allies, will take steps necessary to impose costs on Russia for its continued aggression. If we must take this step, the U.S. War Department stands ready to do our part in ways that only the United States can do." Yeah, I want you guys to see this statement here from Pete Hegseth while he was at the Ramstein meeting today in Brussels, Belgium, because I think it's very telling on how the U.S. administration, their rhetoric is changing here. Whereas before, just months back, it was very pro-Russian. Now they're starting to say, hey, we want this war over with. Trump has ended so many wars already. Now we know Trump really wants to end this war between Ukraine and Russia. That's probably his golden egg. We know he really wants to end this war, and he's trying to very hard. So apparently they're ready to impose some sort of necessary measures if Russia's not ready to end this war. And this is not typically something we see from the Trump administration. So about a minute and a half long. Take a look at this.
Now, if this war does not end, if there is no path to peace in the short term, then the United States, along with our allies, will take the steps necessary to impose costs on Russia for its continued aggression. If we must take this step, the U.S. War Department stands ready to do our part in ways that only the United States can do. We remain clear-eyed about the fact that the most effective deterrents to Russian aggression are, number one, a lethal, capable, and European-led NATO, and number two, a combat-credible Ukrainian military able to defend itself and thereby continue to deter Russian aggression along NATO's border. Again, peace through strength. Under President Trump's steadfast leadership, and in particular with our European allies, we're going to bring an end to the war in Ukraine. The war must end. Like we saw him do in Gaza and in the Middle East, President Trump knows how to forge peace, to create opportunities in situations, in scenarios where peace seems far off. He and he alone has the ability to do that. This is not a war that started on President Trump's watch, but it will end on his watch.
Okay, so we know that the Trump administration really wants to end this war. They're pushing for a couple things right now. Number one, these tariffs that were just being announced today that could possibly be put onto China to force them to stop purchasing Russian oil, which in the end could possibly collapse Russia's economy. And they need money to fight this war, obviously, right? And then on top of that, these Tomahawk missiles, that's another big thing. We'll be talking about that more in just a minute. I have an update on that. And that these could be going to Ukraine here very soon. Possibly in the next week, we could hear the announcement of these Tomahawk cruise missiles to Ukraine that Ukraine will use to strike targets behind enemy lines deep into Russian territory, upwards of maybe 2,500 kilometers deep into Russia, depending on the variant that is given to Ukraine. So let me know what you think the U.S. has planned here, aside from these two major events, the Tomahawks and possible tariffs onto China. What else do you think the U.S. is going to do, along with European partners, to try to force an end to this war, hopefully very soon? Let me know what you think on that. All right, now let's move on to Ozen Defender, and it says, during a recent visit to the United States, a Ukrainian delegation, which including Prime Minister Yulia Sviridenko, National Security and Defense Council Secretary Rustem Umerov, First Deputy Foreign Minister Sergei Kyslytsya, if I'm saying his name right, and Ukraine's Ambassador Olga Stefanisha met with executives of the American defense manufacturer Raytheon, who produces the BGM-109 Tomahawk land attack cruise missile, or TLAM, as well as Lockheed Martin, who produces the Typhon Strategic Mid-Range Fire System, or SMRF, a ground-based system able to launch the Tomahawk. Now, isn't that interesting? We know that Ukraine could be receiving these very soon, and it looks like the U.S. is very serious about sending these over because we did hear that a Ukrainian delegation was going to be arriving in Washington today. Apparently, they are in the United States, and they went to Raytheon and Lockheed Martin, okay, which is producing not only the Tomahawk land attack cruise missile, but also the launcher that is designed to fire this thing as well. So this is very big news. That is a very big indicator that Ukraine will most likely be receiving these very soon and are getting ready for strikes directly onto Russia to hopefully force an end to this conflict between Ukraine and Russia. So, very big news, guys. Just wanted to share that update there with you. Then finally, Vice Grad 24 breaking. A U.S. Air Force C-32 carrying Secretary Pete Hegseth has returned back to the UK after declaring a 7700 emergency. I don't know if it's 7700 emergency, but apparently there was some sort of emergency that was declared on the flight from Pete Hegseth when he was leaving Belgium today. So he was flying over the UK and then eventually over near Ireland, and then all of a sudden declared an emergency and flew back to the UK. So it looks like something is going on over there. I'm not sure what kind of emergency took place. Hopefully Pete Hegseth is okay. And hopefully they're able to safely land inside of the UK and get some help. I'm not sure exactly what happened here. These are just preliminary reports that were just coming out. Just wanted to give you an update on that situation. Something went wrong on that flight, and they had to turn around and head back to the UK. They were supposed to be coming back to the US today. So I'll follow that story. If we get more updates on that, I'll let you guys know at a later time. But guys, I want to thank you so much for tuning in. Let me know what you think about all these details down below in the comment section. That's going to be it for today's update. If you got something out of this, please smash that like button. Also, if you enjoy my content, please consider subscribing down below. Hit the notification bell. That way YouTube can notify you. And with that, hope you all have a great day. Everybody take care and God bless. And we'll see you in the next one.